dynamics this morning, and what it looks like if and when we become the grown-up in family relationships rather than the child. So I think should be interesting conversation. Before we get started though, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells and your organs, and bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, electrons, and molecules, and lighting you up from the inside out. And as you exhale, exhale any negativity, any remaining fatigue, tension, stress. And now let's just gently press our palms together. Softly, softly, softly rub your fingers against your palms to feel how delicious that sensation is, and bring yourselves present right here, right now. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So being the grown-up, this came about because of multiple conversations with clients and friends about relationships with aging parents, and noticing places where we still remain the child or not, and what does it look like, and what does it mean to evolve from that entrenched role, that lifelong identity. What we're talking about is identities, and to be looking at how our interactions would or do change when we are identified, when we identify internally as an adult, as a peer, for instance, or, as an adult in a relationship, rather than coming to that relationship as a child. Good afternoon, Pat. So good to have you here with us. Welcome, welcome. So we're really, really talking about roles and identities that we become, that become so much a part of us that we don't have the presence or awareness to step outside of those roles. Plus, there's a lot of strength in the influence that is helping to preserve those roles. Good morning, Jennifer. Welcome, welcome. So, and welcome to everybody else who's joining us. So we're talking about roles, but the most entrenched roles that we have in our lives are within the context of our families, right? We're the younger sister, we're the older brother. Good morning, Kimberly. It's so good to have you here. We have roles within our families, and with our siblings, with other relatives, with our parents, we have our roles. And it was interesting. My dad said to me on multiple occasions, "You'll always be my kid," and here being a fully grown adult and capable and competent to be managing my own life. And yet I was always treated like I was his child, not as an adult. And it was very, very interesting, an interesting dynamic, because my dad. Good morning, Josie. Welcome, welcome. So good to have you here. my dad had actually dated people who were younger than me. Not a fact that I'm proud of, but that's, that was a bone of contention, I have to say, with him a bit. And yet, while he treated those people as adults and peers of a certain sort, I never achieved that status with him. And I think it's really interesting how do we break ourselves out of the role that we have, or the identity that we have within the context of, particularly of family, and what does it mean to come to a relationship outside that definition of ourselves. So, when we with parents particularly, and I'm not talking necessarily about their perception, I'm talking about our own, how we slip into a certain role and accept certain or play out certain behaviors that we wouldn't play out anywhere else in our lives. And this topic arose for me, as I said, because I've had conversations with clients, but also I had this revelation as I was walking to the door of my mom's apartment, and was kind of feeling in between dimensions almost, in that I felt myself as the child and I felt myself as the woman. And it was a really bizarre experience, because I had this flip-flop dual consciousness all at the same time, and recognized that the way that I would be interacting as the adult is not the same as the way that I would be interacting as the grown child. And I think there are certain dynamics that develop in the course of our lives that are very much constrained and defined by the roles that we play. And when we allow ourselves to own our autonomy, or our individual identities, as an adult, whatever that means. I guess we get to look at, what does it mean to be an adult, right? But I don't know if any of you have experienced this weirdness. Yeah, it's sort of a cognitive dissonance about, the movement in and out of old roles and patterns. I know I'm not sure who it was that said, if you think you're enlightened, go spend time with your family. But what happens is that these deeply entrenched patterns and roles tend to overtake our presence in many cases, right? That we fall into playing out these historical kinds of dynamics and roles. And Rosalind, good morning, good morning. So Rosalind says, being the grown-up, when I think of roles, I think of obligations and expectations. Yes, for sure. Like with family, I'm guessing that most of us have certain feelings of obligation and responsibility. But I think what I'm thinking about, or what I'm trying to address, not so effectively at the moment, is what it the internal experience. And good morning, Dennis. So good to have you here with us. And Pat says, when my mom was ill late in life, my sister and I looked after her. Role reversal with love. Yes, so exactly. What happens is sometimes in the course of life, the children become the parents. In other words, the people that are caring for and protecting and etc. And at the same time, in the midst of this, I guess I know I'm talking about being the grown-up or being the adult, and that conversation can't really exist without the contrast of being the child. And I wonder, you know, I guess what I'm talking about is holding those polarities, because as the child, there are certain dynamics, you know, like maybe even in some cases, fear, expectation of intimidation in relationships that aren't the most wholesome, perhaps, or you know, carrying forward into our more matured in terms of time type relationships, carrying forward the trauma. And I know I'm not just talking, I know that this doesn't necessarily play for wholesome family relationships, but good morning, Lisa, welcome. So we're talking about being the grown-up. We're talking about the dynamic of moving from the identity of child to the identity of an independent human being in the context of particularly family, because that's when these old patterns are most deeply entrenched. Like if you're the youngest kid, the youngest sibling, for example, how do we take that identity and show up with that in the world without even recognizing it, like carrying forward this identity that is contextualizing our experience. So when do we move from that child to the adult? What does it look like? What is the magic that happens that all of a sudden we can be adults in our lives? Perhaps we'll be adults, and then back in the family situation, there we are as kids that are being told what to do, perhaps, or being told how best to do something, or you know, where there's this hierarchy, even when it's loving, even when it's nurturing, there's this hierarchy of power, let's say, oftentimes, unless we have rebelled against that power, and then that rebellion becomes the definition. I don't know if what I'm saying is resonating for you, making any sense. I just had this flash of insight for myself as I was, as I said, on my way to spend some time with my mom. And there's this certain way, like within family, there is often an assumed privilege of permission in ways of interacting, for instance, that we would never, ever imagine interacting with other people in our lives. And so I was in a conversation and a person was recounting this interaction with their mother, where the mother said, just sit down and shut up and listen. And both of us were like, what, you know, and who else in your life would feel that they have license to speak to you that way, for example, or to assert that kind of domination and control. Good morning, Bernadette. So good to have you here. So I'm wondering about this, to think about the things that, and then the response to that kind of demand is often to sit down, shut up, and listen, right? Because it was coming from the parent. And I'm wondering, is that being respectful of them? Is it being just fulfilling the expectations of the long established role, or is it an opportunity to say, you know what, it's not okay to talk to me that way? Like maybe there's nobody in your life that you would expect that to talk to you that way. So Hope says, hello, welcome, Hope. It's good to have you here. Hope says, only your mother can get away with that. And the thing is, that isn't that the truth? And so what's happening when the mother says something like that, and you're a fully grown, competent, capable adult? What happens? Do you sit down and shut up and listen? Or do you say, hey, you know what? Not okay to talk to me that way. So Bernadette says it's demeaning as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, exactly. And the question is, like we would never, ever, ever accept that kind of treatment from anybody else in our lives. What is it that allows us to accept that treatment from a parent? And what when is it okay to say, hey, you can't really talk to me that way? Not okay. So Kimberly says, I struggle so much in this area. Kimberly, I can tell you, you're not alone. Okay. I love my parents. They are never there to help me when the hard stuff I need support or someone to talk to. They never have. Yes. So it's interesting. I'm sorry to hear that, Kimberly. I apologize it's not mine to apologize for, but I'm so sorry that is something that you experience. And I think that you're not alone in that. And because we also, as children, we have hopes and desires for the love that we can receive from our parents, right? That we want to be loved. We do all kinds of crazy things to earn or prove or validate ourselves to deserve that love if we're not receiving it the way that we want it. And what's happening here is that no matter our age, no matter how competent and confident we are in the rest of life, that there are still these wounds that we are yearning to heal, right? And so Hope says, I laugh, then don't sit down, and my mom rephrases. So Hope, you've been good at training your mom. Congratulations for that. Because we often just sort of succumb to these old patterns and become the children or remain the children that were being disciplined or that weren't good enough or that didn't live into the expectation of the parent or that didn't receive the love in the way that we wanted and needed and desired. So Jennifer says, my mother and I have not spoken for 14 years. There was a lot of physical, emotional, and verbal abuse, including towards my children. I chose to no longer tolerate because she was unwilling to change. So Jennifer, that's a courageous and painful choice. And I'm again so sorry that you've suffered these abuses. And my guess is that you drew the line when those abuses were leveled at your children. And isn't it interesting that we will do things for our children that we would not do for ourselves? And sometimes we just need to choose to say enough. This is untenable, unacceptable. And as an adult, we're putting an end to it. And I'm so sorry that had to be, and I suspect still is, painful for you. And you're not alone in having to make those kinds of decisions as well. Unfortunately, some of us are just in an untenable position and need to make that kind of extreme choice. Lisa says, I didn't. My dad was ill. I was his caregiver. I moved into his home and everything. He was verbally abusive when I was young, and he tried it again. I told him, you did this to me when I was little. You're not going to do it now. I will leave. Congratulations, Lisa. That's really, really powerful. And the thing that I think what we're talking about here is, you stood your ground, and that was really, really powerful. You became the adult and said, no, I'm not going to tolerate this. And the thing that I am aware of is that these patterns that we grow up with, when we're in an environment that is abusive, we often, in our growth and transformation, we often create other circumstances that are mirrors of that abuse. Where we find ourselves in other situations, work-wise or socially, where we're receiving that same kind of treatment because we're in our heart and soul looking for ways to grow and evolve beyond that. And Bernadette says, parents teach behaviors that can carry throughout our lives. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful observation, Bernadette. And actually, this is something that I've had a lot of conversation with about with clients, talking about how our parents taught us a lot of these behaviors that we find so afflicting in our lives. That we notice perhaps self beat up. Maybe the parent is engaged in self beat up a lot, and we learn that from them, or they are telling us how terrible and awful and insufficient we are, and so we learn the behaviors related to that. And we get to observe our behaviors and recognize that we did not necessarily develop that on our own in isolation. And when we recognize that that's something we've been trained to, we might be able to have more patience for ourselves, more compassion for ourselves as we transform through those patterns of growth, move beyond those patterns. And Jennifer says, attempted therapy for years. And so, Jennifer, I so feel your pain and know how devastating it is to really work to institute growth and change and evolution, and to find that it's just not possible. And so Jennifer says that's exactly where I drew the line, and that's in reference to when your mom was being abusive to your kids. Because it's one thing, like, for yourself, you can survive this, you can make it through, but when it's focused on your children, forget it. That's the end. That's the hard line. Right. And I get that. And it's credit to you that you have been a protector for your kids. Hope says, love and light going out to you, Jennifer. 100%. 100%. And Jennifer says, it's very painful and it's taken years to heal. Thank you, Hope. And some of these wounds do take forever to heal and to move beyond, because there's in an abusive situation, we are programmed to be self-blaming, and we're conditioned to be the guilty party, and to recognize finally that, well, wait a second, this isn't me being crazy or me being bad and wrong. There's actually input here that is abusive, and often that abuse, not that it's an excuse or justification, but often that abuse is coming from someone who is also very, very deeply wounded. So congratulations to you, Jennifer, for really, really taking a stand for yourself and doing the work. I can relate to the pain of that, and it takes tremendous courage. And Kimberly says, we are brave souls learning to love myself. And that it does take bravery, Kimberly. It takes bravery to confront the challenges and the emotions and the dynamics, and to really allow yourself to evolve beyond the roles that we have been indoctrinated to within our families, particularly. Because what happens is we play those roles out in the world beyond our family also. And so what does it take to say, wait a second, that's what I grew up with, but that's not who I am. You know, that's the dynamic that I was indoctrinated to, but that's not who I am. And Lisa says, my brother and sister carried the pattern of abuse into their lives. I was evolved enough not to. Lisa, that's huge. And you actually bring up a very important point to what I just said a moment ago, that abusers typically have been abused, and people who have been abused often end up being abusers. And this is something that happens as a result of a lack of consciousness and awareness and willingness to do the work to move beyond that abuse and the whole dynamic, to break the cycle of abuse. Because with sexual abuse, it's often generational. Because that's what we're taught. We're taught how to behave by our families, by the environment that we're in. And we're taught that this is how we show love. We're taught this is how we react to stress. We're taught this is how we cope with situations in life. This is how we protect ourselves. This is how we defend ourselves. This is how we dismiss situations that that are threatening, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Jennifer says, thank you, Mira. Love and light to all of us who are healing from others' actions. Self-love is not selfish. 100%, Jennifer. Self-love is the beginning of healing and health. When we love ourselves, when we are able to truly accept and love ourselves with compassion and care, then we can have the capacity to love others. And then, not that it justifies the abuse, because it doesn't, but self-hatred drives abuse. And we can maybe find some compassion for the abusers while we don't accept their behavior, and why we may choose to not be interacting with them. We can perhaps recognize the deep injury and pain that is motivating their abuse, and perhaps have some compassion for that, even though we can have compassion from a distance. And so Kimberly says, vicious cycle. Absolutely, it is. And it takes consciousness and awareness to move ourselves beyond that cycle. I know for me, it was years and years and years and years to be able to get to a place of self-acceptance, self-love, and also compassion for others. So Bernadette says, to break the cycle can come with consequences of losing family. It can 100%, Bernadette, to, and then becomes a very interesting question of what am I losing? And the other thing is that just because we separate ourselves from the source of abuse doesn't necessarily heal the situation. It takes a lot of work. Jennifer, I'm sure that you're quite attuned to the fact that regardless of whether you're in communication with your mother or not, that's not the end of the work. That's maybe the beginning where you have enough space to breathe and to look and to grow and to heal. That eliminating that influence from our lives is not necessarily isn't a complete solution. It may be an essential part of our solution, of our healing, but it's just eliminating that that immediate influence or that presence. It's not necessarily eliminating the influence, right? Because we've been trained into that dynamic for our lives. And so it takes a lot of conscious and courageous work. Kimberly says, replying to Bernadette McDonald, that's the hard part. I'm experiencing this right now, and I want to be part of their lives so much. They'll be 70 next year. I know if it hasn't changed by now, it's probably not. It's probably going to be this way forever. So, Kimberly, I feel the pain in that and recognize that there's the longing. And so this is the longing of the child, right? To have that love, to have that care, to have that connection that we were denied as children, right? And the thing is, they're not going to change. What gets to change is us. And it doesn't mean that we can change to, nor should we, there's no should here, change to a point where we can relate from a different place, to relate not from the need of the child that was denied, but from a place of adulthood with compassionate understanding, even though like to be able to step out of our identification with our pain in our past. And this is the transition that I think we strive for, is to come to a place of wholeness within ourselves, that we don't need them to be any particular way. And I think that that's the foundation of it, to move away from the identification with our past as a definition of who we are in the present. And that's a really, really, really challenging thing to do. And when we get to that place, there's a profound freedom in that. Bernadette says, I'm 61 now and can totally relate. I love me more than accepting that type of narrative. Good for you, Bernadette. It's huge. It's huge. And I think that there are moments when we can still slip into it because we've been conditioned throughout our entire lives. And so Jennifer says, it still affects my life. Yes, it's work with my adult children as well. Inner work has saved me. I still miss her. Yeah, I believe it. I believe it. And Jennifer, kudos to you for your courage and your persistence. And inner work has saved me too. And I guarantee you that your inner work has saved your children and has shifted their trajectory in life. We are all called to awaken. And Kimberly says, I'm sending love and healing prayers to everyone. Yes, there's so much pain. And the thing is that we can look at our families as our greatest and most challenging teachers. You know, these agonies of growing up in challenged households are the impetus in so many ways to our growth, right? Because from the pain, we look for solutions, and that is the path to our healing. And so it may very well be, I'm just going to flip the table here a little bit. Like, we know the pain and agony that we experience and can experience in the context of family growing up, and that we get to respond to that pain in a multitude of ways. You know, some of us fall into patterns of abuse ourselves, or addiction, or depression. And some of us, even those people that might fall into those patterns too, eventually come to a place of healing and choosing to heal, and following that very challenging path of awareness and growth. Bernadette, so glad that you joined us today. Bernadette says, I have to go and wish you all a heart filled with love and the knowledge of knowing you matter also. Namaste. Beautiful, Bernadette. Thank you so much for being with us. And thank you all for being with us. This is clearly a topic that maybe deserves a lot more attention. So Lisa says, my sister is suffering the consequences of her choices now. She's quite ill and her kids are not there for her. And this is, you know, it's so wild to see patterns of family playing out over and over. And the power of choosing over and over again for ourselves to continue on the path of healing and growth and awareness. So yeah, we reap what we sow, and our parents, you know, we do get to say enough. We get to say the buck stops here, and there is that opportunity and possibility. And it takes courage and it takes strength. And I honor all of you who are on that journey of healing and awareness and awakening. And it's such an interesting dynamic, you know, to be looking at family and how it ripples, how the dynamics of family ripple in our own lives, in our own families, and in our own awareness. And so this is kind of a conversation about, well, what happens if we leave those resentments and those hurts behind? And I'm not saying forget, I'm not saying pretend that it never happened. I am saying, what if we can choose to allow it no longer to define us? and what's available, what's the freedom available when we move beyond those identities to choose, who am I today? Not who have I been, but who am I today? And on that note, I'm going to just call it a morning with you, and a rich, rich, rich morning it's been. Thank you for your candid sharing and your authenticity and vulnerability. And Kimberly says that's the freedom right there, the freedom to choose, who am I today? I don't need to be defined by my past. And so with that, I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live each weekday morning here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page. Please, please check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network's Facebook page, as well as the Facebook page for Enlightened World Living and EWN One with the Earth. And yes, we get to choose. So today, this minute, choose, who am I right now without being bound and defined by my past. With so much love to you. Until next time.